Welcome to the Jaron Jarvis channel. I am Jaron Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you, Dog Man. The spooky house at the end of the street is such a common trope, but have you ever wondered how it became that way? Most people I've met, if you ever mention such a house, will agree that they had one in their neighborhood growing up. Often the house will just be deserted, and the overgrown lawn the result of neglect and nature reclaiming the space. Sometimes, the neighborhood weirdo will live there. Maybe it's a spooky old cat lady. Or a meth-crazed loony. When I was a child, we had Dog Man. I grew up in a fairly normal suburb, maybe a little down on the socio-economic ladder, but there was hardly any crime and all of the neighbors and their kids were nice. I went to school with most of the latter, and we'd spend lazy weekends riding our bikes around the streets together. A few blocks from my house were the train tracks, and a long, rutted road that ran alongside them down to a huge area of bushland. It's all since been bulldozed and developed into a neat little housing estate. But 30 years ago, that's where Dog Man lived. Our parents warned us against going anywhere near the bushland due to the junkies that would camp out and party down there from time to time. They never caused much havoc, but would leave bottles and condoms and needles laying around, which our parents obviously wanted us to avoid. It wasn't until my brother and I, and some of the other neighborhood kids grew old and bold enough to ride our bikes down that old road, despite promising our parents we'd never go that far, that we even found the place. His house wasn't tall and looming and gothic, or anything even remotely as impressive. A single-story bungalow that looked from the street like it couldn't have contained more than 3 or 4 rooms total. The most intimidating feature was an 8-foot steel-barred fence that ran the entire perimeter. It looked like something out of a jail or military base. Through the fence we could see an overgrown yard strewn with what looked like parts of car engines and other chunks of twisted, rusting metal. Oh, and 3 absolutely enormous dogs. As an adult, when I think about that time and the awful thing that nearly happened, I know deep down that they were probably just Rottweilers and that my childhood imagination had conflated them into pony-sized, red-eyed, slavering monsters. But back then my companions and I were terrified of them. On the occasions that we thought we could get away with it, we'd ride down to the bush past Dog Man's house and dare each other to scale the fence, or throw something over it to taunt the dogs. None of us were ever brave enough to actually do either, and we'd console ourselves with fanciful what-ifs. About the children that must have been devoured by the beasts, and the unmarked graves hidden beneath the car engines. As for Dog Man himself, I was the only one amongst my little coterie of BMX bandits that had ever laid eyes on him, and only because one day I'd finally succumbed to a dare. He was tall, lean and lanky with long straggly grey hair and deep-set eyes. He had all these strange symbols tattooed up his arms and what little I could see of his chest under his stained wife-beater. In my memory, he looked like a wolf walking as a man. I'd crept up to the fence on the bushland side of his property and peered through to see if I could see any children's bones in the yard, as I'd been dared. I'd only been spying for a minute or two when he stepped out onto the porch and started sniffing the air. After only a couple of seconds his head whipped around and he glared straight at me, even though I was hiding in the overgrown grass. I bolted out of there like the hounds of hell were after me. In my fevered imagination, 3 of them were. It was one rainy Saturday afternoon that we met Dog Man and his monstrous pets face to face. I was riding lazily up and down the street with my brother Mikey and the kid next door, Doug. Being kids, we had no compunctions about riding even in the worst weather and it was summer, so the rain was refreshing. It was Doug that suggested a race to the bushes, and boredom prompted the 3 of us to start pedaling like mad down to that old rutted road. We flew by Dog Man's house without slowing down, too intent on the race and the momentary glory that would come from the win. Mikey was the smallest of us, but he was also the fastest, so skidded to a stop at the end of the road moments before Doug and I arrived. He held up his hands in a victor's pose before loudly proclaiming that he needed to take a whiz. I did too, and Doug shrugged his agreement, so we wandered off a little way into the bushes to find our own trees to take a leak on. The sky had turned darker, and thunder was rumbling around the horizon, so we knew we'd have to head home when we were done. I was just zipping up when I heard Mikey scream. I turned and hopped and skipped through the dense bushes to where I'd last seen him, thinking maybe he'd found a snake. When I got there, I was alerted to heavy rustling nearby as though someone was struggling. I started to panic, thinking he'd been bitten, and dashed after him. I broke through into an open area filled with spinifex grass, and spotted a tall man with long hair dragging Mikey into a thicket about 10 meters away. Mikey saw me at the same time and started to scream again, but the man hit him in the head and Mikey fell limp. I had no idea where Doug was, but all I could think of was saving my little brother. I grabbed the biggest stick I could find and plunged after him. It couldn't have been longer than literally a minute before I nearly fell into the junkies' camp. They'd set up in an old creek bed, and the area was strewn with sleeping bags, milk crates, old mattresses, bottles and other detritus. I saw Mikey and Doug laying against a log, unmoving, both with blood in their hair and on their faces. My heart leapt into my throat. Now I was here, what was I going to do? I should have gone for help. What if there were more junkies? I'd barely picked myself up when a filthy hand grabbed my collar. I tried to spin around, swinging my stick wildly, but a short, crazy-eyed man stepped out from behind a tree and grabbed my wrist. The long-haired man who had snagged my collar wrenched me to the ground and started pulling at my pants while the short one pinned my arms to the ground above my head. It started to rain heavily. I don't clearly remember what happened next, it was so sudden and chaotic, but I'll describe it how I saw it. A bone-shaking roar exploded from nearby. For a second I wildly thought it was thunder, and hoped for a lightning bolt to smash into the campsite. Instead, 3 enormous black dogs barreled into the clearing like the wrath of the devil, and slammed into the junkie creeps that had pinned me with impacts I could feel through the ground. I'll never forget the sounds that followed. I could never have conceived that a grown man could scream like that. I felt spatters of hot blood and saliva fleck my face and arms amid the freezing raindrops as I crawled across to Mikey and Doug. Doug was already rousing due to the fevered howling and growling, but Mikey wouldn't open his eyes. We grabbed him by the arms and started dragging from towards the road. Peripherally I was aware of the flailing and scrambling and pouncing that was happening near the bank, but I couldn't bring myself to look. All I could think was I'd have nightmares for the rest of my life. We made it through the spinifex patch, back past our pea trees, and were just about at our bikes when we skidded to a stop. Dogman was standing there in the torrential downpour in the battered old Akubra and ankle-length duster. Until my dying day, I will swear that his eyes were glowing in the stormlight. Behind me, I heard rustling and heavy panting. From the corner of my eye, I could see the 3 hellhounds stepping from the bushes and starting to circle us. Doug dropped Mikey's other arm and ran. I shouted at him but he vanished into the rain and scrub. I started to cry. Mum and Dad would be so angry with me. Then Dogman uttered the only word I'd ever hear him speak. Heel. The 3 colossal dogs calmly trotted towards him. Dogman turned his back and walked away, the dogs in tow. I sat shivering and sobbing in the storm next to my unconscious little brother for what felt like hours. After a while, Mikey woke up and asked me what was wrong. The rain had washed most of the blood off his face, but there was a huge lump over his right eye. I hugged him and never wanted to let go, but he shook me off and got on his bike. "We're gonna be in so much trouble," he said as he started to ride towards home. And we were. Holy cow, were we ever. I never ventured back down that road again, despite the most taunting of dares. Part of me wanted to thank Dogman. The rest of me was too terrified to cross his path again.